What's going on, fantasy people? You are back. This is the True North Fantasy Pod presented by Monkey Knife Fight. I am Trav, coming live from the True North Fantasy Lair. We are back in the lab, as always, co-hosting and West Coasting Tyrell McLaughlin. How goes tonight, my man?
Good. Had Travis Kelce in a lot of fantasy lineups. That was quite the Thursday nighter we enjoyed.
Absolutely great Thursday nighter. Going to run through a little bit of that before we get into some of our topics tonight. But I would be remiss if I didn't mention that all of our work can be found at truenorthffb.com, the website that houses all of the work from the True North content machine. So yeah, check all the written articles out there, all the shows. There's landing pages for all of the shows. We have weekly shows on the YouTube channel, so make sure you subscribe there, which is where you should be watching right now. If you're an audio listener, please go subscribe. That helps us out a lot. And it's the TNFF network on YouTube. So yeah, really appreciate all the support. True North FFB on the socials. Love getting comments and questions from people. It's crunch time. The fantasy playoffs are upon us, and we want to help people win some of them titles. You can see that belt behind us, provided by another one of our sponsors, Trophy Smack. We want to win those this season, Ty, and it is time to do so. I'm fired up.
Ditto. And maybe some people came here via fantasypoints.com, the Fantasy Points Media Group, which we are very proud members of. If not, people should definitely go and check them out at fantasypoints.com. Make sure you're getting a subscription using our promo code 21TrueNorth10. And the bowl guide is out, and that is an invaluable resource. It's the best way to get ahead of the incoming class and to wrap your head around what was always a crazy year in college football that we all, of course, watched every game of at this point. So yeah, it's a nice little cheat code, I think.
Yeah.
And just a fantastic resource that might be worth a subscription alone, but it's also the best way to support us at True North Fantasy Football as well.
Yeah, 100%. They also actually do have an early bird special on their 2022 subscription right now, Ty. It is 20% off of the 2022 price. So our promo code 21TrueNorth10 will shave a little 10% off the top of that, which is nice. And so I think you're looking in the neighborhood of like $79 for a year's worth of some of the best content on the market next season. So definitely recommend anybody go do that. Use our promo code and check that out. And then I do want to give a shout out actually to Major Caldwell from the Dynasty Vipers. This past week, Ty, I was on the Extra Points show on the Fantasy Points network there. And it's a morning show on Sundays where you go through some Monkey Knife Fight and some Thrive fantasy picks. And we had a good time there. Major's a good dude. It's the first time I've ever podcasted with him. So big shout out there. And we hit on a bunch of our picks, which was the money piece of it. Tyler Lockett was my best one of the bunch as well. So
we'll talk about him again.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're definitely going to get in. And you know what, Ty, I'm not going to waste any more time because there is so much to talk about. Legit, like you and I were revamping this show as like just before we got on air, just because so many people are going to the COVID list, injuries, all sorts of stuff is happening. And we're here to kind of unravel some of that for the people. So yeah, we're just going to get into some news notes and some storylines too. So it's not all going to be like COVID and injury stuff and kind of crappy stuff. We're going to talk a little bit of some storylines and how some offenses are producing as well. But first, I do want to talk a little bit about that Thursday night game, Ty, because you mentioned it. Travis Kelce had a big week. I am heavily invested myself. So that was huge for me. Tyreek Hill also continues to be elite. Kelce put up almost a 200 burger and 2 touchdowns. The game-winning touchdown in overtime, actually, his second. And so he walked that puppy off. And then Tyreek Hill put up like 150 of his own yards. So they're elite. You're not starting any other wide receiver or receiving option really out of Kansas City. Clyde Edwards-Helaire had a disappointing game for the Chiefs with only 9 points, 4 targets, 2 catches for 18, and then 9 carries for 32 yards. So definitely disappointing. But honestly,
he only ran routes on 60% of the snaps that he was even in there too. Like it was the route participation isn't even there. He's just not getting the work in the passing game and barely benefiting from that inside the 5 role too. Yeah, but he played like 50 out of 71 snaps, just not getting that receiving work. Even though Darrell Williams kind of took a back seat to him in this game.
Well, and I think all that being said, it's hard not to put Clyde in your lineup with the way the running back landscape shakes out and seeing the fact that the guy's still getting about 15 opportunities on one of the best offenses in the league. So, like, you got to trot him out as a kind of take your lumps running back
And-
2 option, I think, right now, but you're still trotting him out there, I think.
Speaking of trotting him out, I think we all did that with Austin Eckler. He ended up salvaging his day with the touchdown.
Yeah.
I would say like another good game, and he's had such a fantastic past against the Chiefs, but he only played like 27 of almost 80 snaps on offense. Like that, he had a really low snap total. Justin Jackson played like over 40. So that was really surprising. I guess the ankle was more of an issue than maybe we thought.
Yeah, and your boy JJ put up, I think it was, here we go, 13 carries for 86. So a nice little rushing day for Justin Jackson. He's actually somebody who I prioritized over Craig Reynolds on the waiver wire this past week, just for the fact that Austin Eckler might sit. Didn't end up starting him, but would have got a tidy little 10 PPR points if I did. So a decent flex option, but nothing that's a major contributor for teams.
And it's a Canadian show, so shout out to Josh Palmer, who had the snaps were there. He had a nice catch in that game.
Absolutely.
In the fourth quarter too.
Keenan Allen actually came back. He was a little bit questionable throughout the week as well, but he had a nice little game with 6 for 78 and a touchdown. And I think you can definitely start him. The guys behind him, like you look at Mike Williams, he got 9 targets, but only 3 catches for 49. So I think he's still second on the totem pole.
That one go, boop.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, he had a touchdown. He had a touchdown. We were laughing at him a little bit, poor bastard. And yeah, Guyton and Palmer remain hard to peg and not guys that I would really be thinking of starting in my fantasy playoffs, unless I'm an underdog or I really need that boom game, and then you're just risking it for the biscuit. And I'm always happy if I know that I just have to risk it.
And speaking of risking it, just a side tangent, everyone cares about my fantasy team. So fantasypoints.com did those, I think they're 3,000
this is
player
cool.
pool best ball tournaments on Player Hub or Fanball, whatever we're calling it these days. Long story short, I'm in top 10 in that one, and definitely on the back of the one thing you never are supposed to do, which is draft early tight end and early quarterback in best ball tournaments. But I certainly did it on that team, and it is looking pretty good right now. Let's go.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. I hope you.
So that was the story, like Tyreek, Mahomes, and Kelsey tonight.
Yeah, I hope that team keeps climbing. That was a fun little draft. I am not faring so well in that one, so we're just not going to talk about my team. But I'm at the point where
I got some garbage entries in that tournament too. Yeah,
I'm just rooting for the homie at this point. So Ty, I think the biggest news coming from this week, we're just kind of moving along here. The biggest news coming from this week is all of the freaking COVID action. I mean, you look at the Rams and the Cleveland Browns; they're both in enhanced protocols. They're being called. Whatever the hell that means. Basically, it just means a mega lockdown for these teams. For the Rams, the main names that it affects for them is Darrell Henderson and Odell Beckham. We're kind of still in just kind of a wait and see. I think you're starting both of those guys if they're starting. But any assessment on the Rams there, Ty? Are you doing anything different?
Yeah, I mean, I'm moving Justin Jefferson up, and I think he's like a wide receiver 2 almost at this stage against the Seahawks, hosting the Seahawks. Can't move Kupp up anymore because he's the wide receiver 1 each week at this stage of the game. But yeah, I think Justin Jefferson's a wide receiver 2. Like, I'm probably starting him over someone like, Michael Pittman plays the Patriots. Hollywood is questionable. Have to monitor his health against the Packers. So there's a lot of guys in that range, like Ayuk. With Debo back in the mix, how is he being used? So I think Van Jefferson is definitely in the mix for the Rams in a lot of starting lineups.
Yeah, I like that. And I think
Darrell Henderson, Darrell Henderson's out. Sony Michel is definitely a decent start against the Seahawks, who give up fantasy points to running
absolutely
backs.
Yeah. I think just like if there's a guy starting for the Rams in the backfield, you're probably starting that guy. So I would be starting Sony Michel as kind of like a top 20 option. I was just going to circle back to Van real quick. I think Van Jefferson could be a guy that you start even with Odell healthy, because he will give you some spotty production. Another guy that you might have to take a lump on if Odell is healthy. I think if Odell sits, though, then I think it's a pretty cash money play. And I think Van could come in really clutch for some of these teams this week.
Yeah, I lean into that high variance. I like those players. Yeah.
100%. So let's carry on.
Well, I was going to go to the Browns if you wanted to, because like Baker out, Case Keenum out. So Nick Mullins is starting, and Jarvis is out. I think Austin Hooper's out.
Yeah.
So your boy, DPJ, are you starting DPJ, even though it might be Nick Mullins at quarterback?
I think I am. And, like the reason being is because I don't know if Nick Mullins is necessarily a downgrade from Case Keenum, from Baker Mayfield, the way he was playing as of late, and like you've seen Nick Mullins on San Francisco, like he's got a little bit of gunslinger mentality in him, and I think that plays very favorably into Donovan Peoples-Jones's kind of low target volume, big play upside game. And so you're a little bit less enthused because of the rapport, because of the time they spent together, et cetera, et cetera. But I think just for the chance that there's a couple of deep shots coming, I think especially because with such a depleted offense, this team's gonna probably get behind. I mean, they're playing against the Raiders, and you got some Browns players coming out saying they don't know how the league expects them to play this shorthanded and whatnot. So definitely keep your eyes on that one, especially if you're invested in those teams. But I think Donovan Peoples-Jones is the guy that I would want to start.
The point total is like 38 in that game too.
So yeah,
it's interesting. Like Vegas is kind of laughing, even though Vegas is involved in this game.
Yeah.
And yeah, plus 3.5 for Cleveland. So, they're actually underdogs in this game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think like I said, it's not like the sexiest option and you're not as enthused, but I would take a dart throw on Donovan Peoples-Jones. I was just looking a little bit at him versus Jarvis, and Jarvis Landry, like he is getting more volume. I will give him that. Donovan Peoples-Jones has been very sporadic as far as the volume, but Jarvis Landry has only got one touchdown. He just got it this past week. And his best fantasy finish weekly this year was 15, like wide receiver 15 in week 1. And then he came back, I think in week 8 or 9, he was wide receiver 16. Donovan Peoples-Jones has a top 5 week this season. So that's like, if I'm picking one of those guys, it's going to be DPJ, just for the fact that he can give you that like big boom as the guy who might only get 4 targets, but he might catch 3 of them for $120 and a touchdown. You know what I mean? And I'm liking what we've seen from him as of late.
We know how much like the tight end gets used in this offense, and tight ends are out as well. So there's a lot of, and Kareem Hunt is out as well, who's the receiving back, I would say, as sparingly as they've used him in that fast of the game.
Yeah.
But he's doubtful, or I think he might have been downgraded out actually.
He is
that
out,
definitely puts Nick Chubb in like the top 5 conversation this week.
Easy.
And I can't really imagine. I don't think any of us can imagine how much volume they're probably willing to heap on him this week.
Oh yeah, I'm thinking like 30 carries for sure, and like watch him get 6 or 7 targets too. That'd be
amazing. Yeah,
excellent.
Yeah. Well, the Raiders, I think you can run the ball on.
Yeah, definitely, and I think Nick Chubb can run the ball on anybody. So I'm going to keep us rolling through these, Ty, because we got a lot to get through. A little group of wide receivers on the COVID list: Jalen Waddle, Allen Robinson, and Tyler Lockett, all 3 on the COVID list. Keep an eye on them. I think if I'm ranking those 3, it's going to be Tyler Lockett, Jalen Waddle, Allen Robinson, if all 3 are able to play. But it's a pretty tricky one. You look at the Seattle Seahawks, man. DK is not practicing this week with a foot injury. Dwayne Eskridge and the other wide receiver that's behind those 3 guys is not practicing. Freddie Swain. Yeah, his name was just escaping me there. So it's going to be a rough week for the Seahawks if those guys can't get back.
A lot of Rashad Penny.
Yeah, a lot of Rashad Penny.
But I think we could see some DK Metcalf bounce backery because, they play the Rams, and Jalen Ramsey is, of course,
as long as he plays,
one of the, like 15 guys who's on the COVID list.
Yeah.
With the looming Seahawks matchup. Well, I think maybe there's some teams exercising an abundance of caution. You know what I mean? With some of the COVID restrictions. We could have mentioned that off the top. There was like some new rules put out today, like the NFL and NFLPA agreed to updated COVID-19 protocols for players on Thursday. So if you're watching this on Friday, that was yesterday, and that effective immediately allows players to test off of the COVID list with no symptoms for 24 hours and just a negative test. So just one negative test that says, also puts in some other rules for like, indoor meetings and all that kind of shit. But
nice.
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting. And, just thinking of some of these running backs, I don't even know if we mentioned that, like Darrell Henderson isn't out. So Sony versus Seattle. And then in that Seattle game, it's going to be it's going to be Rashad Penny.
Yeah.
There's no Alex Collins. So it's really just a kind of a clusterfuck this week. And,
totally.
And DK, like you said, he hasn't even practiced. So like how much do you want to rely on that guy as a top wide receiver?
Yeah, it's pretty brutal out there, and I'll
take what I can get this week is what I'm saying.
100%. Yeah, you're not sitting DK. That's the tricky piece about this is like there's guys that are underperforming, but they're also better options than anything else that you've got there, especially because some of the options that you have on your team that may have been better may not be able to go this week. So you got to kind of take the healthy guys and kind of run with them and cross your fingers a little bit. It's just been a crazy season, and this is like quite the microcosm that's kind of coming to a head for us fantasy gamers. So.
And you see how gross it gets at this time of the year sometimes. Like, we could be talking about Javonte Parker as a solid wide receiver 2 option because they played the Jets and Jalen Waddle is out. And Gaskin, Salvin Ahmed, Phillip Lindsay, all those guys are also on the COVID list. So they could be looking to throw the ball as an extension of their run game like we see in that offense with Tua and that low average depth of target. So, you know, I'm thinking about decisions people might have to make, and they're tough ones. Like, I'd be starting studs like a DJ Moore, even less than 100% in a very tough matchup over Devontae Parker. I'd probably start Hunter Renfrow for sure over him, but you know, maybe Van Jefferson we talked about. I'd probably start over play too. Devontae Parker, but I think I'm saying Devontae Parker is going to be in a lot of starting lineups this week.
Totally, and that's a tricky one too because you just don't know because they've got some other like just random options behind him. Mac Hollins has been like producing here and there, so it's gonna.
But I think back to a game last year, like against the Jets, and Devontae Parker late last season, right around this time of the year last year, had 14 targets in a game against the Jets, scored about 20 fantasy points. I think he's just set up nicely in this one because of the lack of run game that they might be able to put forward, and like it's gonna be Laird and Malcolm Brown. Right? Like it's going to be ugly. Yeah,
100%. So you mentioned DJ Moore there, Ty, and he's dealing with a knee issue. He's been a little bit limited in practice this week, but I think he's good to go. And along with him, Terry McLaurin had some concussion issues happening. He didn't practice Wednesday, but was limited on Thursday and should be good to go. Just to kind of tie those two in a bow, would you say Terry McLaurin starts as kind of borderline wide receiver 1 in Washington with all those other injuries that they've gotten, and say DJ Moore is kind of in the wide receiver 3 territory with a tough matchup and kind of spotty performance for the wide receivers in Carolina?
I think they're probably both must starts, and like DJ Moore is probably going to get ranked below him just because of the matchup and the uncertainty for health or whatever, but he's at least 7 targets in every single game, 10 targets in back-to-back weeks, even with this poor quarterback play. So I think so long as he goes, the volume should make him a wide receiver 2, and Terry's probably like a high-end wide receiver 2. I think Taylor Heineke probably is good to go. I think they said
he is good to go.
But definitely. If Terry McLaurin was to sit, by the way, with the concussion, like I'm not looking to start Adam Humphries, DeAndre Carter, Sims, Curtis Samuel.
Yeah, it's just such a crapshoot, right? Like I like some of those players, and like I would like to think that they're going to be the option, but in a must-win game in the playoffs, I mean that's where we're at. You gotta be careful with those guys. If you are taking a dart throw though, Ty, on any of those guys, who's it going to be? Like, say you had to pick a guy, Terry's going to be out. You got to take the guy who you're confident in.
Probably DeAndre Carter. Like,
really,
just a reflection of where the season is and where it strays to from where you thought it might be 6 months ago. Yeah.
Totally.
I think I would start DeAndre Carter out of that group.
Wow. I think I would probably go Adam Humphries.
But shares and best ball are crying.
Yeah. And I think I'd go Adam Humphries, but I think that might come back to burn me with like a 7-point performance. You know what I mean?
Well, and that's nothing. The way it's going to be your wide receiver 4, like a 5th guy in your flex or whatever those leagues are when you're starting these guys. So,
totally.
Because I think of them as wide receiver 5s, even if like a Terry McLaurin sits, I wouldn't be able to rank any of those guys higher than wide receiver 5 territory. And they'd all be pretty damn close, all 4 of those guys, I think. So it's ugly pickings, and I don't think it's just that Adam Humphries wouldn't give you the ceiling. I don't think.
Totally. So the big one, and sorry, just Taylor Heineke, full participant in practice the last 2 days, so he's going to go. The big one in the wide receiver landscape for the rest of the season is that Nuke Hopkins is out for the remainder.
No more nukes.
Out for the remainder of the regular season, so there will in fact be no more nukes in that the Cardinals offense there. I was going to say Carolina, but yeah, so he's out for the rest of the regular season with a knee sprain. And Christian Kirk had a nice little game last week. AJ Green has been a little spotty. And then Rondale gives us a little bit of flashes here and there as well. So how are you shaking this out? Like, who do you think is the guy who benefits the most from DeAndre Hopkins going down with injury?
I think it's tough to say because like we might just be giving them all incremental bumps. I would say and Nuke hasn't even been a world beater this season. Like he's barely a top 30 wide receiver in PPR leagues. It's kind of crazy. And I think he's finished outside the top 24 in 6 of 10 appearances this year. So not a world beater. And he hasn't been a top 24 wide receiver in PPR since week 7. So as much as we may have made the point to talk about how kind of like run heavy the Cardinals have been, we definitely still love the passing game. It's just that it's been really spread out. Like if you look, like I think Arizona scored the 6th most fantasy points by wide receivers overall this year heading into Thursday Night Football. And I'm not sure, the Cardinals are able to run the ball anymore than they already are. You know what I mean? Especially when you factor in James Conner's health right now, and could his role be diminished even if he does play in Week 15? So we might be able to kind of just distribute the nuke share amongst the pass catchers, but it might be kind of evenly and just more in their roles that they have. Like, I don't think anyone's going to kind of capture that role. We would love to see Rondell Moore be used a little differently, but I think Christian Kirk, like, he's a wide receiver 3 still. Like, splits don't do anything. Like, there's been no difference in the few games we've seen Christian Kirk sans Nuke Hopkins in his career, and he averages just 11 PPR points in those splits. So, and he hasn't even scored a touchdown in any of the 3 games with no nuke. So, and AJ Green too, like, he's a wide receiver 3. I would say I'd probably start guys like Michael Gallup, Devontae Smith, maybe Devontae Parker. I have them kind of, I think I had him in a tier with a bunch of people. It was trippy, like Jerry Judy's, Cole Beasley's, guys like that. And it was just kind of funny because, AJ Green probably accumulates his fantasy points a lot differently than in a different fashion than those volume-based guys. But, when it comes down to it, this is an elite offense, and I could see myself breaking ties in favor of Cardinals players. About 2/3 of this team's targets funnel to the wide receiver position. Super high success rates, super awesome, amazing yards per attempt when targeting wide receivers. They rank top 5 in completed air yards per attempt. They rank, they're one of the best teams in the red zone. So I definitely think all these wide receivers are in the conversation. And Rondell Moore, you're definitely, like, he's at least part of the conversation. I didn't mean to leave him out there, especially in DFS settings, I think. But he's still kind of like a wide receiver 4, I would think. But with upside. We know what he can do after the catch, but, the yards after the catch has been totally necessary this year for him. So the average depth of target's just been so low. So maybe with Nuke out, with Chase Edmonds on the mend, maybe we do see like an expanded role. Like, we know he's gonna be out there a little bit more, but we'd like to see like his usage be, that vertical slot element on top of those manufactured touches and some carries and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, it's like, he's one of those guys, like you said earlier, he's one of those guys where you're going in knowing you're embracing the variance, right? Like, he's only got 6 targets over the past 2 weeks. The week before that, he had 11 targets. And he was a top 20 receiver, but outside of the top 70 in the 2 games since then. The encouraging thing, kind of to your point there, Ty, is that over the past 2 weeks, he has 5 carries as well. 2 last week, 3 the week before. So that's always been an avenue that we've said that we'd like for him to get involved. And I think this is just a spot for him to get more involved. You mentioned Chase Edmonds there. It's interesting to note that James Conner actually hasn't practiced yet this week. Wednesday and Thursday, he sat out, and they do play the Detroit Lions this coming week, who give up over 26 points per game over the past 4 weeks to the running back position. So I think this is going to be a juicy little matchup for Cardinals starting running back. So I would say, like, those Chase Edmonds managers, be ready to start your Chase Edmonds, because it's going to be a nice little week if he gets in there. And if James Conner is active, then you're smashing that James Conner, I would say, as a running back 1 this week, pretty much. So I think it's going to be a good week for them. And just on that note, that strength of schedule stuff where the points allowed over the past 4 weeks is just another part of the fantasy points toolkit. They have a really good strength of schedule tool, and I'm just looking at the Cardinals schedule for wide receivers as well. Detroit this week gives up over 30 points per game to the wide receiver position. So that's why we were talking about this before the show, Ty, and I said you can start them all. You can start all 3 of these wide receivers. You're just gonna, you're probably gonna get one guy who's not performing, but 2 of these guys I think are going to put up good weeks. And then going forward, actually, they have Indy next week. Not a good matchup for wide receivers. Going to be a tough one, but I think this offense is elite, and you're probably starting them. Week 17, they play Dallas, which is over 39 points per game to the wide receiver just over the past 4 weeks. So I think Arizona's got a schedule that could have some fantasy production, and it could be in both facets, running back and wide receiver. So you're attaching to these guys and
I think
tossing them in that lineup.
And Conner being hurt might be the best thing for those wide receivers. Like, we saw weeks 1 and 2, we saw 3 top 10 finishes from a wide receiver, and it was actually 3 different guys, Kirk, Nuke, and Rondell Moore, combined between those first 2 weeks to give us 3 top 10 finishes at the wide receiver position. But since week 3, they've had this many top 10 wide receiver finishes, 0. So it's kind of remarkable in such an a robust offense for the wide,
Totally.
and one that like caters to the wide receiver position.
And especially with Nuke not putting up those weekly top 10 performances too, right? And so, yeah, I think there's a little bit of that juice to be squeezed out maybe in the coming weeks for the Cardinals offense. So, okie doke, Ty. Couple little just quicker notes here. Austin Eckler, we just had him on the sheet because it was made before this game, but he looked really good, and he's full all systems go. You had him as your running back one this week.
I did, but he played way less than I anticipated. He played.
I think that's probably a good thing, though.
Snaps, and Justin Jackson just way out snapped him. I just did not see that coming.
For sure. I think going forward, though, him getting a little bit more of that rest and just getting a little bit of game action might be good. Michael Carter was a full participant, and he is coming back for the Jets. So I think he's probably the only running back you want to start. And then do you want to kind of toss in on the Jets at all here, Ty? Because Elijah Moore's out, and he was producing.
Corey Davis gone.
And so somebody's got to come up. So why don't you give us a little wrap on that Jets offense?
I don't have a lot to say. I've been impressed with what we saw from Michael Carter after the Jets week 6 bye, running back 7, running back 1 overall that 1 week, but he was running back 35, running back 28 or something. He had a running back 13 performance. So it's been a bit boom or bust is what I'm saying. And, a little feast or famine. So I think we've seen the range of outcomes, and it's not hard to imagine that lower end playing out because the Jets are just such a bad team, and they're, in worse shape as they've been all season, I think, from like a competitive team standpoint, sort of. And so Michael Carter is a guy who's definitely going to be in your lineup, but I just don't have maybe I'll be somebody who's a little bit lower than expert consensus rankings on Michael Carter.
Totally. And pretty tough matchup this week against the Miami Dolphins for running backs over the past 4 weeks. 15.6 PPR points given up per game to the running back position. So not a lot of points to be had. Rex Burkhead for the Houston Texans. It's crazy that we're even mentioning Rex Burkhead, but he was actually getting some meaningful work, which is wild. He is out. David Johnson's back in. Yuck. TJ Hawkinson had surgery on his thumb, and he is done for the year. Not a huge change overall for me for the weapons, just because we've been kind of operating with the wide receiver production that we're getting being a bit of a bonus. I think this just solidifies that bonus might continue. Amon-Ra St. Brown has looked great. We really, really like him, and we're starting him, in fact. But do you think there is any more trickle down from TJ? Do you think it just solidifies, or do you think there's going to be some more volume coming for Amon-Ra? Maybe a little bit Josh Reynolds peppered into that bad boy?
Yeah, I think, and we'll definitely see whoever the running backs that are active on game day. Jamal Williams is also a member of that COVID list.
Totally.
In the NFL. But yeah, I think the running backs will be heavily involved in the game plan still. And I think Josh Reynolds and ASB become interesting, I guess. Josh Reynolds is like a wide receiver 4, maybe a wide receiver 5 for me, but I think there's upside there. It's just a tough sell tying to Jared Goff, tying to this Lions passing game. You know what I mean? And especially with the running backs getting back in the mix, I just think if Swift's back, that's a big chunk of the passing game, I would imagine. Amon-Ra St. Brown, though, I can see the argument to call him a wide receiver 3. He's probably in a tier with guys like Jameson Crowder, Sterling Shepard, maybe former Lion Marvin Jones, but he kind of has the allure over those guys because he's a rookie, and we know what these wide receivers do down the stretch in their rookie season. But there's also wide receivers in that range of my ranks. I'm just looking at it here. They just play in such superior offenses. So guys like Cole Beasley with Emmanuel Sanders, Gabe Davis, Emmanuel Sanders is out. I'd probably start both those guys. And the Cards wideouts for sure. Christian Kirk and AJG for sure. But this is a game where if he comes out and has a big game, maybe it starts to be like undeniable territory, right? Because he's had back-to-back games with a dozen targets, and he's looked really good going back to the walk-off touchdown a couple weeks ago against division rival Vikings. That was very exciting stuff.
And I think his game is kind of, if I'm buying into anything out of Jared Goff, Amon-Ra is kind of the receiver for Jared Goff that I'm going to buy into. Like Josh Reynolds, tough sledding. We love the rapport that he had previously in the Rams offense and stuff, and he could get some of those deep shots. And I think, like you said, the matchup's not necessarily terrible here. If you look, since week 11, Arizona's given up 40 points per game to the wide receiver position, and their matchup the week after is also giving up over 40 points, and that would be the anyway, I don't have it pulled up. Too many tabs open, Ty.
Yeah.
But anyway, there's some points to be had there, and I think Amon-Ra is going to be the guy because that's just the target volume is going to be there where you can't say that for the other guys. Okie doke. And then lastly, another tight end here. Darren Waller is out with a knee injury. It sucks, but I think the only pass catcher we're really getting into is Hunter Renfrow as maybe like that, mid to back end wide receiver 2 at this point. And then Josh Jacobs has been heating up as well as kind of like that top 15 running back. But outside of those guys, like I'm not in on Zay Jones. And it's just a smattering of guys that you don't want to put in your team after that with Derek Carr at the helm.
And I think Hunter Renfrow is a borderline wide receiver 1 with no Waller. It's good. He has at least 7 catches in 6 of the last 7 games. Only 3 targets thrown his way over the last few weeks have been incomplete passes. His 30 catches lead the NFL. He's second in receiving yards over the last 3 weeks. He has over 100 receiving yards in back-to-back games now, which is insane. No wide receiver, by the way. So this might be it's not going to be Hunter Renfrow who does this because no wide receiver has had 4 straight 100-yard performances this year. Can Hunter Renfrow do it? But I also agree with Josh Jacobs, even though he definitely underwhelmed on the ground. We saw him more involved in the passing game, which was encouraging, especially for dynasty owners, I would imagine.
Yeah, so it's just a weird one amongst the landscape and the amount of players that they filtered through that wide receiver position there, and Hunter Renfrow remains, right? So we like that. These next few guys, Ty, it's a few quarterbacks who we think they're all going to play, but I wanted to kind of utilize them to take a look at their offenses overall. First 2 guys, Aaron Rodgers and Josh Allen, couple of hurt digits on their feet. Both have toe injuries, but it's looking like they're both going to play this week. Let's zero in on the Packers here first, Ty. A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones behind Aaron Rodgers. With Aaron Rodgers playing, we're going to get to the wide receiver position, but I think the big question people are asking themselves are A.J. Dillon versus Aaron Jones. Aaron Jones is that guy supposed to be that elite producer, efficiency, touchdowns, horse for your fantasy roster. Has been a little bit more of a bumpy road. And then A.J. Dillon is absolutely heating up and looking like a centerpiece for what is a team that has Super Bowl hopes. So I think if it's working, they're going to continue to use it. But what are you seeing out of this backfield? I know you love you some Aaron Jones, but I also know you love you some being water, Ty. So how are you taking this?
Yeah, I think you can take it however you want right now because it's up for debate. I think it's still a fairly defined kind of backfield where A.J. Dillon just happens to be getting more than 50% of the carries right now over the last couple of weeks. But Aaron Jones, it just feels like the injury bug has followed him yet again this year. And he didn't even practice today. So it was pretty weird that he didn't practice with all the COVID stuff going on. And I still think you could argue that both these guys are running back 2s in weekly rankings right now. I still gravitate towards Aaron Jones just because he's going to get the more valuable touches, like the passing work and 2-minute drill stuff that he's still getting and all that. But I do think A.J. Dillon belongs in a lot of starting lineups, and he's probably going to be a low-end RB2 for me.
Yeah, I would agree. And even in that span, Aaron Jones missed a game over the past 3 weeks, but A.J. Dillon over the past 3 weeks has 12 targets, and that's something that we didn't really expect. Yeah. 1 receiving touchdown. So there is a little bit of kind of cherry on top that we're seeing from A.J. Dillon, along with some pretty effective rushing work for him. 46 carries over that span, with 15 carries going to Aaron Jones in those 3 weeks. So it's pretty rough. Aaron Jones, I just think he's just not getting the chance to show what he's got, because I think if he gets a little bit more, and like you said, if that health kind of coincided, I think we'd be seeing a lot
and
more
honestly,
out of him.
I think they cannibalize each other a little bit. I don't think we should anticipate A.J. Dillon to get 2/3 of the goal line work, even though that's pretty much what we've seen over the last couple of weeks. Maybe even more for A.J. Dillon, but he's basically had that goal line role over the last couple of weeks, even since Aaron Jones has been healthy. But yeah, Aaron Jones has still been under 50% of the snaps. Maybe he does eclipse that this upcoming week, and I expect him to start getting more involved in the passing game. And we saw last week A.J. Dillon wasn't even targeted in the passing game. So I think the roles are kind of defined, and that might cannibalize them a little bit, especially in a game that's coming up with a very low point total.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a tough game. They're playing the Baltimore Ravens,
the Lamar-less,
probably Lamar-less Baltimore Ravens, and we're gonna We're going to get to Lamar in just a second, but I want to finish off on these Green Bay Packers here because Baltimore has been susceptible to wide receiver scoring, and we know we're starting Javonte Adams, lock that, load that weekly. Are you starting anybody behind him? And my boy MVS of the acronym boys has been looking pretty decent lately, and we've seen a little bit of Alan Lazard flashes as of late as well. So how are you shaking that out, Ty?
So I got Valdez-Scantling as my wide receiver 40 or so right now, but not too far off. So let me do an either or for you. Let me flip it over on you. So we'll do it, and I'll make it only guys with acronyms if I can. So what about MVS or ASB, Amon-Ra St. Brown?
I think like that could be like whether I'm an underdog or a favorite dependent, but give me MVS, baby.
What about AJG?
MVS, I think.
Really? Yeah. See, I think I'm AJG there and Amon-Ra. So I think I'm a little lower still on Valdez. I just can't do it, I guess.
I love me some.
Oh, I got MVS. Another one here, DPJ or MVS. So Donovan Peoples-Jones.
Dual heartstrings you're pulling with these boys. I think I might go MVS just because of that Browns team being in shambles. Okay, Aaron Rodgers versus Nick Mullins. I'm going to go Aaron Rodgers on that one. But those are good ones. They're all like kind of tiered out
against Baltimore, right?
Yeah, I just mean like Nick Mullins is throwing the ball to DPJ as opposed to Aaron Rodgers for MVS.
Mm-hmm. So there's just so many backup quarterbacks starting him.
Yeah,
starting to lose.
It is.
Grip here.
It's pretty tricky to.
Okay, I'm out of acronym guys here that are ranked in that wide receiver 3 or 4 or 5 range. Yeah, that's tough. MJJ.
Definitely MVS. So,
so you're pretty high on MVS.
Yeah, well, I mean, MJJ hasn't really been doing a whole time, but we're gonna get to some of the Jacksonville stuff because it's been fucking wild for those bastards too. Jesus. Okay, so I mentioned Josh Allen. How about their wide receiver core? Emmanuel Sanders is out, so you're starting your Beasleys and you're starting your Gabriel Davises too, probably, right?
Yeah, I think Gabriel Davis is a guy I'd probably start over MVS as well. Like, I think they're in a similar range, that wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 range. So like wide receiver 36 to 48 range, wherever you want to have them.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think they might both be guys that we should gravitate towards because they could make your week or, be worth that start in your flex on one play, both of them.
Yeah,
and Gabriel Davis brings something like I want to see him more in Buffalo. I mean, he's like they've kind of lacked a bit of a vertical element to that passing game in Buffalo that I think we all expected. Like, the intermediate game, the bullet is still there for Josh Allen, but the deep ball just hasn't really been there. That blow the lid off the defense kind of play. And I think Gabriel Davis like offers some of that upside in that offense.
Totally. He absolutely does. And they just haven't been giving it to him. And it's funny because the past 2 weeks he has touchdowns, but they haven't been of the deep variety. They've been red zone targets, which we like to see that as a part of his game, but we just want to see some of those deep shots as a part of his game as well with Josh Allen at the helm. And then what about like starting any running backs for the Bills? Devin Singletary has been getting like the majority share, and it looks like Matt Breida has jumped Zach Moss on the depth chart, but Zach Moss has come back into a couple carries after the healthy scratch a couple weeks ago. Too hard to start, or are we in a place where we have to pick one?
I'm not starting either of them or like really even looking at them, to be honest. Yeah. And this week especially, I think they have the Panthers on the schedule to give up the third fewest fantasy points to the running back position per game. So just a tough matchup, and I think they will use their passing game even sans Emmanuel Sanders.
Yeah.
Like, just totally move up your Dawson Knox, your Cole Beasleys, your Diggs should pay off this week, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. But if you're dead for one, I would start Singletary just because he did have 8 targets last week. And just because here's a look into one of my fantasy teams that our listeners care so much about is that I'm in a position where I have to start Devin Singletary as my running back 2 in the league. And thankfully, he's just barely hit double-digit points for me to make it stomachable. So thanks a lot, Devin. You mentioned Lamar Jackson, Ty, so let's unfurl that bad boy because there is a lot to shake out there. We've got the Bateman over Hollywood debate with Rashad Bateman looking good. We got Mark Andrews as the number 1 tight end in the league right now for fantasy purposes in PPR leagues. And then we got whatever the hell they're doing in that running back position. So why don't you start with the Bateman Hollywood debate? How do you see that? Is it Bateman?
Well, I'm definitely always going to lean towards Hollywood just because of what he offers you, lean into that variance, especially when you get near these it's not your wide receiver 1 or anything you're starting, but Rashad Bateman's definitely heated up, and Hollywood did not practice on Thursday. That's definitely one we got to follow and look up tomorrow because, with all this COVID going on, that could be the reason that he didn't practice on Thursday. So make sure you look up Hollywood on Friday.
Mm-hmm.
Rashad Bateman definitely is a guy that we could start. I just don't know if I'm starting him if Lamar Jackson's not out there, right? Like it's pretty insane. Like actually, what amazed me is I was looking at Lamar Jackson game split. So like what is what is Baltimore average with and without Lamar Jackson, because he's been out a few games before, and their points for go down significantly. So they just score way less when Lamar Jackson isn't their quarterback. Yeah. But what I was surprised with is their rush attempts. They average about 35 rush attempts per game, whether he's been in there or not. And they average, over a rushing touchdown per game. And they average over 150 rushing yards per game as a team with or without Lamar Jackson. But the passing yards go down from 220 to just over 140 passing yards per game. So you're just not getting any upside from the passing game. Even though like the attempts aren't that different, like 30 attempts to 27 attempts, it's just literally that they're scoring way less because they're passing the ball so much worse without Lamar Jackson. So that really affects the wide receivers. And my reticent, I'm just not reticent to be starting any of those weapons outside of Mark Andrews right now.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I was looking at it too, and like it's got to be Hollywood, just for the fact that it's such a shaky offense. That you kind of got to go with the guy who can do it in one play, as opposed to the guy who flashed an 8-target game last week and played pretty well. And now everybody's saying him over Hollywood. Over the past 3 weeks, Hollywood is out targeting Bateman 25-14 with a 24% share to Bateman's 13% share. Hollywood has 28% of the team's air yards and Bateman only has 12. So he's still getting kind of the more lucrative usage. And if you're going to hang your hat on anything in such a uncertain passing offense, it's going to be that for me too. So I like that.
And just really quick, I was looking up some snaps and stuff too for that Baltimore offense. And one thing you got to remember with both those wide receivers is here's Mark Andrews' end zone target percentage market share of last 100%, 50%, 100%. And I'm just looking. So I think Marquise Brown and Rashad Bateman have combined for one end zone target over the last 3 weeks. So it's going to Hollywood in the most crucial times. And that might not be there this week anyways without Lamar Jackson.
Totally. And yeah, just to kind of polish it off with Mark Andrews there, just kind of love to see that the guy is the number one tight end. I don't know if that's going to remain after this week with what Travis Kelce just did on the Thursday Night Football game. But I think Mark Andrews, I think he's getting volume that we didn't really think that we could see out of a pass catcher in this Baltimore offense. He's already over 100 targets, like every receiving category. He's reached career highs already through 13 games. And so we just really like to see that. And I think it just kind of illustrates that the door is kind of open for Travis Kelce maybe to relinquish the role as king every season of the tight end landscape. And just kind of on that note, actually, Ty, we've been trying to get a deep dive episode on the tight end landscape out, but there's just been so much action that we've had to prioritize all the news and the moving and shaking across the league. But we are planning on doing a nice little deep dive into the tight end landscape because there's a little bit more parity there, and we want to have a look into that. So make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that little alert button, and you'll be up to speed on when that does come out, because we're loving recording these in-person shows, and I think it offers us a little bit more freedom as far as doing like little short videos and stuff like that. So we're hoping to keep pumping that stuff out. So if there's any like little videos that any of you guys would want us to record, we love suggestions and ideas like that. Kind of gives us kind of a path and a direction to hone in on. So please leave a comment on the video and let us know if there's anything that you'd like to see us kind of go over and break down, because we'd love to do that for you.
Yeah, and I'm pumped to record that tight end episode. Like it's because of guys like Mark Andrews that there is more stuff to talk about. It's more exciting to talk about the tight end position, and that hasn't always been true in the past. And Mark Andrews averaging like over 25% of the team's targets, air yards, all that kind of stuff, over a 10 average depth of target. So he's just been a really exciting player. He's seeing a ton of the end zone targets in his offense as well.
Yeah, man. Okay, so do we want to flip over to you and run us through some of these new storylines? Actually, you know what, Ty? Let's give a big shout out to our friends over at Monkey Knife Fight. Of course, they are a longtime sponsor of the True North Fantasy Pod and True North Fantasy Football overall. And yeah, so with our promo code with Monkey Knife Fight, of course, you know it. They are some of the best player prop games in the industry. You can multiply your money by 2 and have some of those kind of safe entries. You can multiply your money by like 20 and 40 if you want to go for those 8-player entries. And so you can really string those together and make a lot of profit with Monkey Knife Fight. And that promo code TNFF will get you an instant match on your first deposit of up to $100. So if you drop a hundy, you get another hundy. You got 2 C notes, Ty, and you can really turn that into a nice little stack for yourself. So please do go check out Monkey Knife Fight. Our sponsors are a huge way to support us in the show, so we really appreciate everybody who's done that and gone over and used the promo code. Feel free to shoot us a tweet, and we'll give you a shout out and show you some love. And yeah, we like sacking the cheddar with some of the fans, so we appreciate everybody sticking around with us. And Monkey Knife Fight is a big part of that for the True North Pod.
Totally. And Trevor Lawrence is a big part of the plans in Jacksonville going forward, I would imagine.
Yeah.
They didn't want to ruin him, so they canned Urban Meyer. Very surprising to a lot of people. There was whispers that this could happen post-London, that London game, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was interesting, like Shad Khan going from a really patient owner to pretty impatient.
Shad didn't want to let him get to London, you know what I mean? Like Shad's very rooted in that London community, so he probably doesn't want any less support for the Jags there, because I think they're the home team over there.
And being Canadian, we should mention that the NFL also reached an agreement with to send some teams internationally. The Seahawks and the Vikings and Canada are all best buddies now, apparently, and we know that living in the Pacific Northwest already.
Yeah.
But yeah, interesting. And Jacksonville is one of the many teams that I'm sure the UK will have to choose from. And they'll have a lot of the backing of the folks across the pond because of how often they get to see them.
Mm-hmm.
But cheerio to Urban Meyer. He is gone. Yeah. And maybe I'll run through a little bit of this before I ask you anything. Like, they're scoring under 14 points on offense, 3rd fewest yards on offense this season, fewest red zone trips in all of football. Nobody has turned the ball over more. And the deep passing and explosive element of the passing game wasn't even there. Like that it's just been so frustrating. 2nd worst completed air yards per attempt in all of football. The touchdowns, the scoring hasn't been there either. Their 1.9% passing touchdown rate this season is just unbelievably bad. So I'm so riled up. I don't even know what to ask you at this point, but do you think they should be looking for like a quarterback whisperer, or do you think they should just hire somebody, maybe conventional, like a Jim Caldwell or something? Do you think whoever they do hire is going to help these weapons from a fantasy value standpoint?
I think they should probably go for like kind of a young offensive hire. They've tried the old hat with Urban Meyer and then old man Marone, exotic smash mouth before that, I believe. And so Shad's kind of tried that. And with this young quarterback, you cannot waste this rookie contract. You're 1 season in. Urban's already pretty much wasted the first season of Trevor Lawrence. And Trevor Lawrence hasn't been playing stellar by any means, so he's not out of the woods here. Don't get me wrong. But I think you got to write this year off, and you've got to start fresh with some dynamism in this coaching staff that you haven't had for a long time. So I think they need to get some kind of new hotness in there. Maybe the recently let go of Joe Brady or something like that comes in, maybe at least as the OC for who they hire as the coach. But they need some young, sharp offensive minds in that building. And so I hope they go that route. But yeah, it's just really tough to say. And I'm just glad that they got rid of Urban, because it was a circus. It was an absolute circus with him in there. Kicking the kicker, Josh Lambo came out and said that they kicked him. I encourage anybody to go to Scott Barrett's Twitter timeline. He put out a killer tweet, and I'm not even going to try to describe it because I won't do it any justice, but just go Scott Barrett DFB on Twitter, and he put out a great tweet as if this Urban Meyer saga was like a Seinfeld skit. And so it was a pretty fun read this morning. It was good.
So Trevor Lawrence is somebody that I think is a hold. There's almost no other way to describe him, especially from a dynasty perspective. What about James Robinson versus Travis Etienne? Because we know Travis Etienne, the selection of Travis Etienne in the first round, seemed like it had Urban Meyer's fingerprints all over it. In fact, we all know it did. So do you think that affects his standing with the organization, because there are very high hit rates associated with first round running backs? But James Robinson has continued to just be a consummate professional, if you will.
Totally. Well, I think I'm definitely more confident in James Robinson sticking around and getting a shot. You know what I mean? Like, if Urban Meyer was still there, I would think going into 2022, he might clean house a little bit and get some of his guys, right? Which is just awful. But I think that would have been more of a vote of confidence for ETN. Now I don't know that anything is certain. I think both of these guys are going to come in and get a shot, and maybe we get like a nice little situation where one of them's a top 20 running back and one of them's a top 36 running back or something. And as this offense grows, maybe they both grow into like a top 24 situation, like almost like a Chubb and Hunt type deal in Cleveland, is the hope. But that's kind of best case Ontario, right? We don't really know what's going to happen. But I would hold both of these guys. I wouldn't be selling either of these guys because you want to see what happens there, right? You want to see if the situation gets better, or maybe they do make that exciting hire that makes you a little bit more excited to have these guys on your team. Like James Robinson, you didn't invest a bunch in James Robinson unless you traded for him. But most folks kind of drafted James Robinson or picked him up as a UDFA and kind of stuck with him, or I did, that's for sure. And so he's definitely paid off there. And then ETN, you're just waiting to see what that upside is. You haven't even seen it yet. So I'm not moving him at all, unless somebody's giving me like a ransom for him, but I don't think anybody would. If somebody's coming after ETN, they want to get him on the cheap just because he's still so unknown. So I'd be holding both of those guys. And I think you're just kind of hoping for both of them to be able to produce in, like I said, that Chubb and Hunt, or maybe like the maybe a better one is like that James Conner, Chase Edmonds type deal. You know what I mean? So
no, I think
we shall see.
That's pretty good backfield comp. And I think like they're both RB2s in my dynasty ranks. I just checked. Yep. And I actually think this does kind of move them closer together. Like maybe I would bump up James Robinson a tad, yep, and maybe I would actually move ATN just a touch down. Any interest in the wide receivers? Like, do you think this will help them, or do you think like Jacksonville actually goes out and prioritizes skill position in the offseason, like a wide receiver? Or, you know, we're going to talk tight ends. You mentioned is Jacksonville a destination maybe for a tight end or a high end wide receiver in the draft or something?
Yeah, well, I think they definitely are going to be like I like DJ Chark, and I think he has some of those alpha traits, but I don't think this team's going to want to wait around to see it. So I think they're going to be trying to bring some new blood through there, right? I think they're set up fairly decent on offense with Trevor Lawrence, the running back situation. DJ Chark is a nice piece, but if you could add an alpha so he doesn't have to be that, I think that would be better for DJ Chark if he were to stick around. And then I think Laviska has just been, he has been
the worst.
Terrible, man. Terrible. He's just, I think he's probably going to stick around because he's young and he's still on his rookie deal, blah, blah, blah. But he's just been so bad. He's got double-digit PPR points only once in the last 7 games, and the volume hasn't been bad at all. Ty, he's got 79 targets on the season, definitely pacing out for over 100 targets. He has 5 or more targets in 10 of his 13 games, but in those 10 games where he's had 5 or more targets, he's hit the 50-yard mark only 4 times. So he's just not giving you any upside. Biggest thing, 0 touchdowns on the entire season. So Laviska Shenault, I'm sorry, truthers, but he's just not cutting it. Only 1 game this season inside the top 24, and that game was his only game with a PFF receiving grade over 65, Ty. So every game has just been terrible on that front, and I think, Laviska, I never was like a huge Laviska guy, and not like patting myself on the back or anything like that, but I think like just kind of confirms that I don't want to even try and buy low on that young receiver, right?
And whatever you think of them now, you might be able to think of them in the offseason. Like Daryl Bevell got named interim head coach. I think maybe there's a chance he gets that job, but I think there's a better chance they bring in somebody who, it's interesting. I really wonder how that's all going to shake out. But for the rest of the season, like all we can really hope for is, like, I don't think we're going to see any more creative usage by whoever, helps out. And that it's going to be Daryl Bevell still designing plays and everything. So it's going to be frustrating for Laviska Shenault truthers. And then obviously us guys who like kind of get frustrated by the lack of athleticism and, not being able to separate and all that stuff. Like he's an exciting player when he's making people miss, but when he's not, he's hard to watch basically.
Yeah.
And, I just think all we can hope is that this entire team gets like a kick in the ass. No pun intended. With Urban Meyer out the door.
Just like Urban just got, right?
Yeah. But I think we even talked about
gave
Marvin
to
Jones.
Josh Lambo.
Yeah. Yeah, we even talked about Marvin Jones. Like he's in that tier with like Donovan Peoples-Jones, Amon-Ra, St. Brown, all those guys.
Yeah, I would say so. I think like, he's pretty in line with Laquan Treadwell for me right now, just with the way that the target volume has been shaking out. I think Darrell Bevel is actually going to be a really good thing. So you know what? Now that I think about that out loud, I'm going to change my mind and go back. MJJ is definitely the guy that I would want there because Darrell Bevel just being at the helm and maybe not having Urban in the mix. Like I could see this being a team that does have that fire lit, and maybe they just come out hot this week and put up a nice little game. So Marvin would be that guy. But it's kind of good to see Treadwell come in there. You know what I mean? He's had a decent little stretch over the last couple games, quarter of the team's air yards over the last two. And he's the only player on the team in the last 2 weeks with an average depth of target over 10 yards.
Wow.
So that's, wow, in a bad way, though, because it's terrible.
That's
so hopefully we see that increase for the team with Darrell Bevel in there. And maybe they just kind of go balls to the wall a little bit.
Yep, definitely a wait and see kind of thing, but not expecting too much difference from the guys there. What about the Broncos backfield? That's where I want to go next with Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams. This has been kind of a frustrating RBBC, and it's kind of sobering because we see all the weaponry in this offense from the wide receivers to the tight ends to the running backs, but this poor quarterback play and a tough division that they play in. Yet Javonte Williams is valued as like a top 10 running back in Dynasty. So thinking about it for the fantasy playoffs, and then maybe even give me your take in Dynasty if you want about the evaluation that we're seeing from Javonte Williams. But what are you thinking about Javonte Williams so long as Melvin Gordon is there and is involved?
Yeah, well, I think Javonte Williams is still the guy who I would want to own for the rest of the season, and obviously easily in Dynasty. And I think he just kind of offers that pop that Melvin Gordon doesn't really offer. And I was thinking about it and thinking, like, do they cap each other? And I don't think they really cap each other because I think we've seen some ceiling from both of these guys. Just this past week, Melvin Gordon had 23 PPR points in a game where he had 0 targets. So that's kind of nice for Melvin Gordon as that touchdown scorer. And then Javonte Williams, he had 20 PPR points this past week and actually has over 20 in 3 games straight and has been a top 10 running back in those 3 weeks with Melvin Gordon. The running back 2 weeks ago, Javonte Williams was. So I think like they don't necessarily cap each other's ceiling for the rest of the season. I think they maybe just kind of cap the type of volume each other are going to get, but I would be starting both of these guys as running back 2s rest of season. Javonte more as like a high-end top 15 option, and Melvin Gordon more as that kind of top 24 option. But I think like with if you factor in the running back situation across the league and kind of the options that you're going to have, I think these guys are going to be locks in your roster. Javonte probably as that running back 1 and Melvin probably as that running back 2, right?
Yeah, and they're actually favored over the Bengals this week, and those are the games you want to start. Like they're home favorites this week, and those are the games that you can anticipate Melvin Gordon maybe scoring a touchdown. So I don't think they should be ranked too far apart, and they're both probably running back 2s the rest of the way, especially in games where they're home favorites. The Panthers are probably a very different story. What are you doing with Chuba Hubbard and Amir Abdullah? Are you Chuba over Amir? How are you ranking those guys this week?
It's ugly. Like I don't want to. These are guys that you're whereas Javonte and Melvin Gordon obviously are guys that you have to start and you have to start in important roster spots. These are guys that are very on the fringe for me as far as I would even be willing to start them. I'd like to say I was Chuba over Amir, but I don't know that I am that necessarily because Chuba only got 10 carries and no targets, and Amir had 4 carries and 4 targets this past week, with Abdullah soaking up 60% of the snaps and or just under 60. Cam is just going to be kind of taking that work in the red zone. And Chuba had that touchdown, which was all good and well, but we can't guarantee that he's going to get one of those every week. So I don't want to start either of them. And if I had to, I think I would go Chuba just for the off chance that he gets that red zone carry, but I'm not like confident in that. Where are you sitting, Ty? I know you do like that receiving aspect of the running back position.
I guess I'll start Amir after what we saw last week. Like it was more that I'll start Chuba over Amir. Yeah. I think even though that's not been the tune I was singing last week. But yeah, I'm not starting either of them, especially against the Bills this week. It's the worst matchup in fantasy for running backs. Just lost my place on the show sheet.
It's all good. We're gonna go Tennessee Titans next time.
Yeah, talk about gross RVBCs. So Derrick Henry is, he could come back, I guess. But what do you think about Ryan Tannehill with this kind of gross running back by committee, do you think Ryan Tannehill's value is kind of tanked? And tell me for like rest of season how you're valuing him, and then even in dynasty as well.
Yeah, he's like a maybe streamable quarterback to rest of the season. He is, he gave us 18 points last week, 9 the week before, 12 the week before, 20 the week before, 15. So we're looking at like ceiling for him is 20 points. Then you consider that everybody on this bloody team is banged up and he has nothing around him. And I am not trying to start Ryan Tannehill. If we flip over and look at his schedule upcoming, we're looking at Pittsburgh next, which their defense can flash. San Francisco, good defense. Miami, good defense. So those aren't really a good triumvirate to go against the next 3 weeks. And the situation he's in just makes it all the more terrible.
Do you think you could get like a Zach Wilson for Ryan Tannehill in like a third in a super flex league, or do you think that's like Zach Wilson's just too young and that's not?
Yeah, I think the youth. I probably wouldn't do that. You could float that out there because somebody might do it.
What about the opposite end of the spectrum? Would you be able to get like a Tom Brady for Ryan Tannehill, who people probably assume Ryan Tannehill has a few years left? Brady probably has like 7 or 8.
Yeah, yeah. I think like you probably could from some, but again, like it really would depend. Like if there's a team who's trying to win a title, I would probably stick with Tom Brady.
So if you couldn't make either of those deals happen, which I don't know if you would be able to make that happen with the value that Ryan Tannehill holds right now, would you maybe trade him for a Jordan Love?
Yeah, I mean, you could. I don't know. I don't think so. I think he probably still has like a couple of decent seasons ahead, especially because we know he's got a little bit of rushing that can come with him. I think the Titans are going to stick with him after this season with a healthy AJ Brown. I think who you trade him to is the AJ Brown owner 100%, because we know that AJ Brown owners are truthers. And so if they think they can kind of stack that bounce back in 2022, you might be able to kind of get maybe put him in on a deal to get something else, or I don't know, but he's kind of a hard guy to trade because like we've seen some upside that kind of makes it hard to sell low on what we think we could get out of him, eh?
And I think Julio Jones is in the same boat too, like hard guy to trade. That's for damn sure.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think he's worth like a top 100 pick in a startup next year? Like, is this?
I think he's going to go there if
like,
he's
is
healthy.
This the death of him, or is it injury kind of concerns that we have with Julio Jones, or is this like the death of Julio Jones?
No, I think it's just injury concerns. Like I think if he's healthy and Ryan Tannehill's clicking, healthy AJ Brown, I think he can probably give us top 30 wide receiver season if healthy, on a PPR or on a points per game basis for sure. So I don't think it's the death of Julio yet, but I don't think I think we're closer to that than like a resurgence, unfortunately.
Yeah. I want to go to the Saints offense, and speak of a resurgence, Alvin Kamara came back strong.
Hello.
And what was really awesome is that both he and Taysom were able to eat on the ground in week 14. So do you have both these guys as locked in number ones at their position? Like, is Taysom Hill a QB1 and Kamara, I assume, is back in our RB1 graces?
Oh, right back in the RB1 hearts. Absolutely. 27 carries, even 5 targets. We're cool with that. It's not like Alvin Kamara at his height target levels, but that's all we can expect from him with Taysom Hill as the quarterback. So Alvin Kamara absolutely is like a top 5 option going forward, and Taysom Hill's a top 12 option as well, just for that rushing work that he's going to give you. And the measly passing work plus the rushing work equals a top 12 quarterback. It's that simple with Taysom Hill.
Yeah, especially with guys like Lamar out this week, and I'm just looking at my rankings here now. So I have Brady, Mahomes, Josh Allen, Rodgers, Matt Stafford against the Seahawks, Dak Prescott definitely ahead of him. So I have a lot of guys actually I probably will still rank ahead of him, but Taysom's going to be like a back end QB1, right in a range with Jalen Hurts somewhere, I would imagine. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Actually, I'll probably have Jalen Hurts ahead of him against Washington, but Taysom Hill is a pretty good matchup himself.
Yep, we like it.
I guess we could go to the 49ers because Debo had 8 carries last week, 1 catch. Actually, we saw something similar in week 13 as well. So what are you doing with Debo Samuel right now?
I think you're kind of holding fast and you're still starting him because if you remember last week, like there was some questions as to whether he was even going to play. And so I think this maybe could have been kind of a little way to kind of mitigate the work that he had, but keep him out there in some fashion. So I think you're still starting Debo and hoping to get some of that big after the catch work that he can give you and the touchdowns that we've seen from him, which has been lovely. But I think you're at a point where you can definitely confidently be starting Brandon Ayuk now as well. I think better, like more receiving work for Debo is coming other than that one reception. We are encouraged by that carry share. So if you can add some of those targets on top of that, I think Debo is going to be back to where he was earlier this season. And we might see some excitement from this San Francisco offense that we haven't quite seen yet. Like maybe we do see Ayuk, Debo, and a little bit of George Kittle producing all at the same time because
George
we haven't
Kittle's
seen it really.
Like completely transformed over the last couple of weeks. Like he's finally seeing, he's got like over 40% of the targets in back-to-back weeks, which is crazy enough, but over 40% of the air yards as well, which has been a big problem with this game this year is the lack of air yards. So very impressed with what George Kittle has done. And that's why I'm kind of like a little bit skeptical on Brendan Ayuk this week. Maybe I should be a little bit more optimistic since I love Brendan Ayuk. But yeah, and I hope we see, Debo get back to over that 20% target share that we just haven't seen in a while. But yeah, Brendan Ayuk over 30% of the targets last week. George Kittle over 40%. So I just don't expect those two to combine for over 70% of the targets this week. So I kind of have to take away from somebody, especially if Debo is gonna regain. Like not all these things can happen. That's for sure. What about Elijah Mitchell if he's back in whale, which I expect him to be? Like, how high is too high in a matchup against the Falcons?
We do like that matchup quite a bit.
Who would you start in that matchup, Cordell Patterson or Elijah Mitchell?
Oh, damn, dude. I think it would have to be Cordell Patterson just because I think he's probably got 5 to 8 targets coming his way where I don't think Elijah Mitchell's getting that.
I'd probably start him too.
Yeah.
They're both like plus matchups too, but I think it gets interesting when you think of Elijah Mitchell in that back end running back one spot because we were talking about like Nick Chubb just has the world this week. Alvin Kamara in a tough matchup is likely going to see some targets out of the backfield. Leonard Fournette in that same game is somebody we're definitely starting as a locked in running back one at this point. Najee Harris, Joe Mixon, the volume boys. But then that's where I am with Cordell Patterson, Elijah Mitchell and stuff. So, and then once we're past them, we'd be talking about a Clyde Edwards-Helaire, which we saw. Aaron Jones is in that range for me, like Josh Jacobs, who is in such a low scoring affair that we expect. So it's a tough decision. And I expect almost everyone who has Elijah Mitchell on their roster will be starting this week. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I'd put James Conner in that conversation as well. Like he's like that's a nice
towards the top end of that conversation.
It's a wild little tier. Detroit. Like who would have thought that before the season that those would be in our top 12 running backs on a weekly basis. It's just a wild one.
So I mentioned Leonard Fournette there. I wouldn't mind sidetracking and asking you, like, let's talk about the Bucs really quick for Dynasty. Like, do you think Leonard Fournette is a workhorse right now? And what do you think his value is in 2022?
I think going in, like in a Dynasty startup, I think you're probably going to get some value on what he can produce over the next 2 seasons, provided he stays with the Bucs.
Resign in Tampa Bay.
Totally. And I think that's what he should do. Like, I think it would be stupid for him not to, because they've showed
run it back.
Run it back. Who else is going to put you in that favorable role in an offense that you know and that you have produced at a running back one level in? So I think it's a no-brainer for Leonard Fournette, if they'll have him, that he needs to go back there. And so, like, I think he's going to be a value again, just because people are going to shit on him being Leonard Fournette. And who knows what they do behind him in that backfield. So that could be a factor in some of this. But I think, he's probably going to be giving us top 15, top 20 numbers. Like, we'll see who comes back to health, because there's been a ton of injuries where I think if a lot of those guys are healthy, maybe Leonard Fournette's pushed down just a little bit, but definitely can't dismiss what he's done this year, because it's been fantastic. And he's been like a top 12 running back. And it's I think you got to think that he's going to do that again next year if he's on this team. I just think it's going to be a little bit more short-term than some of these guys. I think he's got like maybe a couple years left to do it at this level. And I think a lot of it is hitched to Brady being a part of this team and kind of them wanting to capitalize on whatever window is left.
And Gio, like, with respect, it didn't really work out with Gio this year. Like, they kind of seemed to try and bring in a pass catching back. He has been able to stay healthy, really, and including this, I believe he's out for week 15 here. So Leonard Fournette's enjoyed some pass catching work too, which has given him like a good floor to go along with that ceiling that he can enjoy in that offense. And yeah, I think he's like kind of a valuable guy to go after in Dynasty because of that offense that he plays. Yeah. As simple as that. Yeah. Chris Godwin, I think, is somebody who might get priced out. Like if you go to overthecap.com and look up the Buccaneers, and they have very few players that they're spending a shitload of money on heading into 2022. It might be really difficult for them to not just accept the comp pick and let Chris Godwin walk possibly. Long story short, it could be a 2022 season without Chris Godwin in Tampa Bay. Do you think he would increase his value? Do you think Mike Evans improves his value in that offense as well if that happens? And what do you think of the Buccaneers wide receiver depth
totally
being good enough to allow all this to happen?
Okay, so I'll start with Chris Godwin because I think like he could improve his value, or he could go somewhere that's going to give him equal value to what he's been doing over the past little bit, which is elite numbers over the past, say, like 8 weeks or something like that, over this season with Tom Brady, really. But I mean, is he going to go somewhere that's going to put him into like a top 5 fantasy wide receiver position? I don't think he necessarily is. So I think like maybe long-term he can increase his value because like he can go to a place that maybe has a little bit more youth at quarterback. Maybe he goes to one of these young studs
Jaguars
who can sustain him for a little bit longer time. Whereas I think the clock is ticking on Tom Brady, which I mean, we've been saying for 10 years now. So obviously like you were joking when you said he has 7 or 8 years left, but needless to say, he could prove us all wrong and have another 4 years. But I think long-term Chris Godwin could improve his value going somewhere else. But I think in the short term, he's definitely not going to be able to give you that upside with really most other places aside from with Tom Brady. Moving into Mike Evans, I think it definitely would boost his value, but I think his role is so defined that I think somebody would kind of come in and almost assume a little bit of what Chris Godwin does with the after the catch and taking some of the shorter targets, although we've seen him take some of the deeper targets this year as well. So yeah, I think Mike Evans would benefit maybe a little bit, but not as much as it might seem with Chris Godwin and his heavy target share going out the door. And I do think their depth can handle that because I love Tyler Johnson. I think he can do a lot of what Chris Godwin freaking does. A lot of that stuff. I think he can be a jack of all trades wide receiver for you. And then Jalen Darden has a little bit of a speed element. So if you put those guys with Mike Evans, like you still have a nice little wide receiver core. And then, Brashad Perriman coming in and out the door every 6 months, seemingly. He can produce here and there as well. And I think some of that is just that you've got Tom Brady. And so if you get like adequate receivers who have some speed or have some skills, he can utilize those skills. And so, I do like this depth as long as Tom Brady's in there.
Yeah, and I just love Chris Godwin. Like I think he definitely is close to a wide receiver 1 in my dynasty ranks, and it's he's kind of like that guy who gets left out of the conversation when it comes to what he can do after the catch. Like it's been the year of the yak, and he's up there with those guys.
Well, and I think some of that might be because if you kind of like see him and you look at him putting up those monster numbers. I guess we've seen some of that with Cooper Kupp, but like Chris Godwin doesn't necessarily seem like your kind of Deebo Samuel yak guy, you know what I mean? But he's got some of that to his game. He's just like a little more tall and lanky as opposed to the thickness that Deebo and a guy like AJ Brown provide after the catch.
No, definitely. So one more team I guess we could hit, even though we already kind of talked about them, but I wanted to talk about the running backs with the Lions really quick. Like what do you see kind of taking place the rest of this season? And do you think we should be interested in some of these lesser known guys in this backfield?
I really don't think we should. Like, I think like I said it earlier on the show, I prioritize Justin Jackson with the potential of an Austin Eckler injury this week on the waiver wire over Craig Reynolds, who looks like he's probably the lead ball carrier on this team. I just think like, what did he have? Like set 10 for 75 or something like that.
Yeah. I don't
I don't have it in front of me either, but which is like fantastic.
Got that Shefty tweet saying we should have been starting him if we had him or something. Yeah.
And
I thought was kind of tongue in cheek. Like I think I said like, oh, I'd like to be playing Adam Scheffner in fantasy.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, Jamal Williams on the COVID list. I think DeAndre Swift suits up though. Like that's what I'm crossing my fingers hoping to see this week, because if he does, then he enjoys these next 2 matchups in fantasy semifinals and fantasy championship week, and I think he could turn out to be a big league winner for sure.
Yeah, I think.
But and the other part is like Jamar Jefferson and what's his face Godwin
Igwebuike.
Yeah, they're a little bit that you probably drop those guys.
Yeah, I think so. I just dropped Godwin, Igwebuike in the league actually, and I just wouldn't want to start these guys unless it's DeAndre Swift, because I have it. Like I'm trying to defend this Kings Classic belt, people, and DeAndre Swift is a big fucking piece of that. So I want to do that. I really want to do that. And on that note, Ty, we're going to ride out of here, my man. That was a really fun episode. I think we jammed a ton of stuff. Like when we're looking at that sheet, I didn't think we'd hammer that in an hour and 15, but we made her happen. And it was a blast, man. I like these in-person pods. We've been saying that, and it's fun to get together. It's fun to do that. We just got one camera. We don't have to worry about two different internet signals, two different sets of equipment. We just plug in and we get going, and it's fun kicking it with you, buddy. So I appreciate that. Want to give some love to our sponsors, Trophy Smack. That belt right there is from Trophy Smack. TNFF is the promo code, and that will get you a free championship ring with the purchase of one of those. You can customize all that stuff. You can send them logos for the side plates, for the front plates. You can really customize it for your league and kind of take it to the next level, and kind of roll up to your live draft next season with some hardware on your shoulder and wow your league mates and put them to shame a little bit. And so do that with Trophy Smack. We really, really love their support and love what they're doing over there. The business is kind of booming for Trophy Smack, so we love to see it. Monkey Knife Fight, TNFF will get you an instant match of 100 bones on your first deposit up to 100 bones. So go check that out. Make a little bit of money. We like stacking that. And then the Fantasy Points Media Group, we talked about it. We love that group. It is ever growing. Lots of great brands in there. Lots of new friends for us, Ty. We actually had a recent meet with the Fantasy Points Media Group, all the different shows in there. So go check it out at fantasypoints.com. There's a nice little page that shows all of the shows in there, and they're just trying to expand and kind of take over, and we're super, super thankful to be a part of that. So 21 True North 10 will get you 10% off of everything they got going on there, and namely the CFB Bowl Guide and the 2022 Early Bird Special on the 2022 subscription. So definitely go get one of the best deals of the year with 21 True North 10 at Fantasy Points. Cam. All right. That's all I got, man. That was a lot of talking. I'm kind of at a blank now. We had a great, great time tonight. Until next week, we really, really wish all of the people luck in those fantasy playoff matchups. Please hit us up on Twitter. Ty is at TNFF Tyrell. I am at TCL14. Shoot us your questions. We'd love to see it. Comment on the YouTube video. Also love to see that. But until next week, go get it, fam. Peace.